and 1. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining.
So welcome, everyone. It's Taj, Full Spectrum Capital Partners, and part of the Equitable Development Working Group that's been working with the Office of Kat Taylor and Kat and Harold to curate these conversations. So we're just gonna wait a little bit for folks to come in, and as you come in, just take a moment to put your name in the chat. Share anything about a community that you bring with you into this conversation, or other folks that you're bringing with you into the conversation, and any questions you might have coming into this particular discussion. So whether this is you're joining us for the third time, or this is your first time in the conversation, so welcome, and just tell us who you are as you arrive, and we'll wait a few minutes for everyone else to join. Greetings, Rawa.
Hello. Christina, is that you? Hi.
It's Christina on. Hi, Christina. Hi.
Hi, Anasa. Hi, Rawa.
We'll have our own little family reunion while the rest of the team is together. We haven't seen, some of us haven't seen each other in a little while, so we gotta properly say hello.
Hi, Christina. Laura, we met with David when you were raising for Whose Street's Our Street, remember?
Oh, that's right. Many moons ago. Nice to see you, Laura.
See you, yeah.
It is a full reunion. Thanks for hosting this reunion for us. Kat, Taj, your team. Harold, I'm sure we're related somewhere down the road too.
Yeah, we met, Anasa got to meet David after that at Martha's Vineyard with Crystal. All right, I'm muting.
We'll wait about one more minute, and then we'll get started.
Oops.
And for those of you who are new to the conversation, this is the third in the series on equitable development. And in the chat, there's a link to resources from our previous discussions, and a link to the recordings of the previous discussions, which were pretty epic. We started with Brother Harold telling us the story of Regenesis and the work in Spartansburg, and then heard stories from Memphis, from Richmond, California, and from Buffalo. So today we're shifting gears a little bit, but carrying forward the work we did in those early. So that's where you can go to get caught up if you're just jumping in. And those of you who are coming back, welcome back. And I'm going to turn it over to Kat to get us started.
Thanks, Taj. It's thrilling to see people signing in. Thank you so much. Hope we can carry on this journey. We're very lucky in the company that we keep. And I'm going to let Stevie Wonder start this off. If it's magic, then why can't it be everlasting? Like the sun that always shines, like the poets in this rhyme, like the galaxies in time. If it's pleasing, then why can't it be never leaving? Like the day that never fails. Like on seashores there are shells. Like the time that always tells. It holds a key to every heart throughout the universe. It fills you up without a bite and quenches every thirst. So, if it's special, then with it, why aren't we as careful as making sure we dress in style, posing pictures with a smile, keeping danger from a child? It holds a key to every heart throughout the universe. It fills you up without a bite and quenches every thirst. So, if it's magic, why can't we make it everlasting? Like the lifetime of the sun. It will leave no heart undone, for there's enough for everyone. Thank you, Stevie. While we are after comprehensive, under equitable, community-based economic development through a just transition, we know there is much more required of us. Our holistic approach needs to coexist with focus. We have to pick our heads up and look outside the foxhole to take in the urgency of this Black Lives Matter crucible moment. So we decided that we needed to stop today and pivot from models and methodologies of equitable community development toward immediate needs as the revolution unfolds. We need to hear and heed the calls for defunding the police, decarcerating our society, and shifting power back to Black communities and Black lives. A just transition will depend upon anti-harm and community control, as well as community safety and accountability. This is especially central as Rolla and others alert us that there will surely be a backlash against the tremendous progress toward Black liberation made in these past weeks. We must be ready to defend Black liberation even in its first moments of full realization. And NASA has reminded us of the critical role culture, especially a dominant culture based still upon white supremacy and structural racism, plays in our work. Even the most solid personal transformation does not transcend what it means to be Black in America when one walks out one's front door. That racist narrative is ubiquitous, and it rests on the belief that money is more important than anything, including human life, much less vitality. Surely we seek justice and safety, but those are the bare minimums of our journey together. We ally in order to bring true Black joy, prosperity, and self-actualization. Harold is living out the promise of taking back our democracy, of electing Black and brown leaders who will fight for their community's objectives and be held accountable by those who voted them in. The communities of most concern in the rebalancing of power and opportunity have been marginalized by antagonistic electives for far too long and cannot advance without fair and honest representation. And Taj counsels that all of these goals will rely on putting more and different people in charge, putting them in power through restoration of lands, through return of capital stolen, through reparations for labor and lives lost. What seemed impossible, then implausible, is now feeling inevitable. With all their help, we are kicking off a conversation today with experts who can give full meaning to community safety and accountability, to decarceration, to Black Votes Matter, and to Black liberation. We come through many doors, but to one common table to offer, to learn, to plan, and to act. As a white woman of privilege, I believe that we have not been oppressed, that those of us who have not been oppressed by enslavement, terrorism, and deprivation have to give up power to get this right. We are not going to donate our way out of this. In fact, philanthropy has deterred real reform by intent and effect. It has provided an escape valve to delay the revolution. Our next meeting will illuminate more of the tools of change and be honest about which ones still need to be decolonized and under whose watch that can happen. But today we focus on the immediate needs of the movement for Black lives. Thanks very much for joining.
Whew. Thanks, Kat. Today and this time is a time for truth telling. And we all have our truth to tell. So thank you for sharing yours. And so now we're going to let Ms. Anasa take us through what's next.
Hello, everyone. I am really excited about this conversation today. And Kat, that is one of my favorite songs. I sang it at my kindergarten graduation. Hi, everyone. I'm Anasa Troutman. I am here in gorgeous Memphis, Tennessee. I'm the executive director of Historic Claiborne Temple and the CEO of the Big We Foundation. When we first started these conversations several weeks ago, we came together to talk about how to design and fund restorative approaches to development that, as Kat and Taj have said, that puts more and different people in charge. And it's been a really amazing journey. We've heard so many incredible stories about work that's already happening in communities. And while we were telling our stories, the world started changing before our very eyes. It's been astounding to literally watch the narrative of the value of Black life shift in front of our eyes. But the truth is that a culture shift, if you go back to our very first conversation, we talked a lot about culture. But a culture shift has to go beyond the shift in the narrative and has to go into what happens in communities, what happens in policy, what happens in boardrooms, what happens when we're really having a conversation about power and who gets to have a say. Restorative development is a really important conversation, but it's really only one of the embodied practices required for us to have an actual comprehensive culture shift. There are many, many, many more things that we need to transform if we're talking about a true shift in our culture from a culture that is extractive to a culture that is interdependent. We talk about this on our team calls all the time, like, how do we do this big? How do we do it holistically? How do we find a way to invite you all into a conversation where we can talk about all the things at one time for us to really know that there is not all the things. There's just one thing with many aspects. And how do we hold all those things in the ecosystem that they are and figure out what a systems approach from our side looks like? How do we talk about shifting power in such a fundamental way that everything changes and everything shifts? Here in Memphis, as I'm sure in your hometowns too, there's a tradition of gathering around the kitchen table. At Claiborne Temple, our entire community engagement plan is built around breaking bread and building community with the folks that we are with. In fact, we just last week, our latest round of community development and of the community engagement. And since we can't gather around the kitchen table together, we've been sending meals to people's houses and gathering and eating meals together on Zoom. And while we have not sent you meals to your home today, and I apologize for that, we do want to evoke that same tradition that doesn't just happen in our community engagement, that is actually going to be extended into the building when we build out our restaurant in the basement for people to gather in community. But here on this Zoom today, we gather around the virtual kitchen table, and we have some really incredible, powerful people to talk to us today about opening up this conversation, opening up this culture shift beyond the restorative development, to talk about Black liberation, to talk about the Black joy and the value of Black lives, to talk about what it means to divest and reinvest our resources in such a way that we can have this comprehensive shift that we're talking about. So we're going to be talking to, of course, Kat and me and Taj and some new folks who you haven't met yet, some folks who have been here before. I'm going to have Taj come back and introduce you to a couple of those folks now. We're going to hear from the new folks a little bit about their story so that when we come all back together, you know, all of us. So I'm excited. I hope you're excited. Taj, take it away.
Whew. So we are very, very blessed to invite to the kitchen table and invite into the conversation some folks who've been doing some very, very important work. Because in this moment in which folks are having a serious conversation about what it means to defund the police as a starting point, as an entry point, as a doorway into a fundamental transformation of everything, there are folks who have been impacted by this system in very particular ways. And in particular, folks in our families, in our communities who've been system impacted, who've been incarcerated, who've been harmed in very significant ways by this system. And there's a community of those people. There's a network of those folks in our families and our communities who've been working really hard with not a lot of people paying a lot of attention, preparing for this moment, because they've been building the alternatives. They've been building the systems and forms of community that we need so that we can take care of ourselves, so that we can keep ourselves safe, and so that we can transition resources out of these systems of harm and violence, and put them back in the hands of communities, and have the people who've been most harmed, who know most about all of the ways that this system does not work to support Black life or any other kind of life, to build something else. So we're blessed to have Rekia Lumumba, who's a part of the Jackson, Mississippi family, and a very important leader in that very important community and for the work of Black liberation in this time, and also a leader in the People's Advocacy Institute, a leader in the Movement for Black Lives, the electoral justice effort, an OSF fellow, and she's going to join us and share a little bit about her work and her journey. And we're also joined by one of her collaborators and co-conspirators, Ms. Denise Coleman, who's with the National Council of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, and also with People's Advocacy Institute. And one of my favorite co-conspirators, Ms. Christina Hollenbach, who is been working in support of the leaders that I have talked about in many ways for many years. And in particular, we've been collaborating around an effort to try to get some resources moving in that direction through Justice Capital Fund and a Capital and Justice campaign, which we'll be sharing more with folks about in the coming weeks. But so I want to welcome the three of you to the table, and I want to turn it over to Rekia and Ms. Coleman and let you share a little bit about the work y'all been doing and what it is as we as a community need to know and understand. In particular, those of us who are thinking about just transition, thinking about restorative development, regenerative development, with some awareness of these questions around policing and mass incarceration, but that might not be the thing that we know deeply and intimately in the way that y'all have been working there. So given this community, given this table, just helping us to understand, we need to know better so that we can, as Miss Maya Angelou said, we can know better and do better. So welcome to the conversation. Pass it over to you, Rekia.
Hey, Taj and everybody. Thank you all so much for having us on. It appears that you can't see us. We are both on phone and on video. And so our phone is the 501 number, and the video has my name, Rekia Lumumba. I'm not sure if that helps at all. Would really love to be able to see you all's faces and for you all to see ours. Really grateful for this opportunity. So thankful that you all are creating the space to talk about what is necessary to push forward this movement that is before us now and has been in existence for decades, but is at a place where we can see some real significant change. One of the things I want to share with you today is that Denise and I will have to cut off at around 5:45 our time, which I think is 3:45 your time, because we have an amazing opportunity to really push the state of Mississippi to finally take the federal emblem off of the Confederate emblem off of the Mississippi state flag. We've been fighting that fight since 2001, and finally we're getting some. Here we go. I think you guys can see me soon. I'm sorry, a little technical. Okay, can you guys see us now? Can y'all see it? No? Maybe? Okay. Well, we have an opportunity to get that Confederate emblem removed from the flag. Finally, we're getting some movement from former governors, from SEC officials in the state, and a number of other folks that where if you hit their pocket, they'll move. So we're seeing a lot of change or push for change because a number of sports players have decided not to play. A number of colleges have decided to boycott and things like that if this flag isn't changed. So this is a really exciting time for us, and we're holding a rally here in Jackson in in about an hour. So we're going to be moderating that or emceeing it, whatever you want to call it. So thank you all for having us. But what do we need to talk about right now? I mean, there's so much happening in the world in the midst of one of the greatest epidemics of our lifetime, where that is literally attacking Black and Brown and Indigenous communities the most. We are also fighting and continuing the fight that has existed since, at least Columbus first set foot on this continent, the fight for equal rights, for being treated as human beings and not as capital, not as property. We're really this fight for liberation and change. I am with Gila Lumba People's Advocacy Institute. One thing I'm not an OSS fellow yet. I have not applied. I'm not an OSS fellow, but I am an Atlantic Philanthropies Fellow for Racial Equity, a former OFRI fellow. So I just wanted to make that correction because I don't want to give any false pretenses. But as I sit here with Ms. Denise Coleman, who is one of our great leaders here, who served 38 years inside of prison. She literally spent time in every single woman's federal prison in the United States, having gone to some of them twice, serving a life sentence, spending 8 years over her sentence here in Mississippi once she was supposed to be released. We had the opportunity at the People's Advocacy Institute to work to gain Ms. Denise's release. And 2 years ago, she literally just celebrated her Freedom Day about a month ago now. May 29th, just celebrated her Freedom Day, May 29th, which made 2 years. And she's now leading our clemency campaign to decarcerate Mississippi Department of Corrections to release women who are aging, serving life sentences, and sick inside of prison. So I'm really happy that she's here to join us, and she'll tell you more about the work she's doing and her story. I'm also, I say that I work at the intersection, or the work that we do here in Mississippi and throughout the nation is work that sits at the intersection of criminal justice and electoral justice. We recognize that without political power, without the ability to control the land upon which we live and to control that collectively, that we don't have the power to really change the systems that need to be changed to create the change that we need for our loved ones, for our communities to live safe, to live in joy, and to not just live, but literally to thrive, to have good quality of lives. We all deserve that. And so we recognize that in order to see that, we have to also engage in the political process. We have to engage in a different way, one that allows us to really lift up this idea of community-led governance. Let's see. Okay. Can you guys hear me? I'm sorry. It's like a lot of tech stuff happening, so I want to give some space to make sure you guys can still hear us. Can y'all hear us?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Can y'all see us?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Well, Ms. Nisi said good. So three things that we do is that in this intersection is, one, we really lift up this idea of community-led governance. This idea that we have to really fight for a different democracy, one in which community members are not just voting for the candidate that's going to provide, promises of $15 minimum wage or free education or family leave, or who offers a lot of ideas around social justice. But literally, we actually have to be the policymakers ourselves, that we have to begin to shift the tide of being governed, having people represent us inside of government, to actually having representatives that are taking direction from citizens, from residents. And so we list this idea, this opportunity for community-led governance through what we call people's assemblies. And these are assemblies where masses of community members come together regardless of their right to vote, regardless of their age, regardless of their former criminal history, come together and provide concrete solutions, policy solutions, as well as practical solutions around issues that they are facing hyper-locally in their neighborhoods, in their cities, and in their states. And so this is really important because it begins to shift the tide from being governed to actually governing. And this occurs in places all across the world, right? And it actually had been occurring here in the United States during our time, several times. One time during, you see it happening in indigenous communities way before the United States became the United States. But then we also saw it occurring in African communities here in the United States during slavery, where on the slave plantation, our communities literally began to govern themselves on the plantation, in the fields, in the grounds where we were housed, right, where our people were housed, where we had to decide, how are we going to take care? How are we going to distribute the little bit of food that we had to share collectively? How are we going to use the land to grow what we needed to grow without getting in trouble by those that were controlling our lives? How are we going to determine who would marry who, and how that marriage would happen, and who would settle disputes on the plantation? You know, we have to make those decisions as a community ourselves, and those happen in the form of what we call assemblies. The more modern day approach to those assemblies is what we saw during the Fannie Lou Hamer and Medgar Evers period of time, right here in Mississippi, leading the civil rights, the voting rights movement. Leading the voting rights movement, which led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act. What we saw here in Mississippi is assemblies that led to the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, where we saw thousands of Black folks come out and engage in a mock vote just to show the strength, the power of the Black vote to actually move for political change. Fannie Lou Hamer and her comrades organized 80,000 Black people to come out to a mock vote to vote. 80,000 Black people, despite the fear of torture and pain and suffering that they would receive at the hands of white supremacists. And so today we see the emergence of assemblies again, and the necessity of assemblies again. We see them as a necessity because right here in Mississippi on August 7th of 2019, we had the largest ICE raid in U.S. history. Over 700 indigenous folks, indigenous to the Americas, were arrested and detained, and over 300 are still detained in Mississippi and Louisiana, separated from their children, separated from their families, because they chose to work here in Mississippi, in the United States. And so, and that occurred on the first day of school. So as children were going home, getting off the school bus, they were going home to an empty house, to the point where school buses had to go back and pick children up and bring them back to the school to find adults to come and pick them up. Hundreds of children left without their parents. And so when we talk about assemblies, we recognize assemblies as a way for not just people who have naturalized citizenship here in the United States, or who were able to get the right to vote, but we're talking about folks who have been denied that right based on their nationality, based on their race, based on their economic status. We recognize that if you live in a place, you have the right to help determine how that place is governed. And so through people's assemblies, we engage in that big democracy. We engage in that work to ensure that every resident has a voice and every resident is cared for so that we can all live our best lives. This throws us now to what we look at when we're talking about defunding the police. So a big part of the work that I do is with the Movement for Black Lives, where I have the privilege to work with the amazing Kayla Reed and Jessica Bird as we lead the Electoral Justice Project of the Movement for Black Lives. And in that Electoral Justice Project, what we do is that we try to build a political home, a space for Black people wherever you are to engage in electoral politics, electoral justice, to ensure that we have the voice and a right to make decisions everywhere that we exist. And in doing so, we recognize that when we lift policies, when we create practices, when we elect folks who care about communities, especially Black communities, we know that we are changing systems for everyone, that we are creating a better life and a better way of being for everyone. So through that work, we have been able to lift up the work of Black political power development by offering many grants, by hosting a fellowship yearly to train Black organizers to become political operatives, campaign managers in their local cities. And we are going to be launching the Black National Convention in honor of Black conventions of the past, where we came together as Black people to create a Black agenda, where we want to push a Black agenda to be adhered to by whoever becomes president in the first 100 days. And we believe that we will have a more progressive president than what we currently have. We're going to continue to work towards that. So that's our electoral justice. That's some of the electoral justice work we do. But at the core of this defund the police work is this idea and understanding that we have to invest in community. At the core of all our work is that we understand that community is central. It's not peripheral to system change. That people who are experiencing the worst of policies, homelessness, people who are experiencing the worst of criminalization, people who are experiencing the worst state violence that comes in the form of police violence, but also comes in the form of economic violence, and also comes in the form of other state violence that we often tend to overlook. State violence that comes in the form of bail and bond that keep people inside of prison, inside of jails because they can't afford to get out. It comes in the form of a mother or a father or sister or a brother seeing their loved one hanging from a tree, as we saw happening in LA recently, or in a county near LA, but we see happen every year in Mississippi in rural communities where Black bodies are hanging from a tree, and the sheriff's department and the coroner says that it was a suicide. And so we know that that's another form of state violence, because it is no suicide. It's a neglect by the state to acknowledge the murder and the killing that is occurring of our people. And so we work to really begin to place funds and resources in the hands of community members that have the power to begin to protect themselves from those harms, and begin to elect folks that actually care about the community. For the sheriff is an elected position in the state of Mississippi. The coroner is an elected position in the state of Mississippi. So we have political power to begin to shift that, to begin to move people into place that actually care about all lives and not about harming Black life. We also look at resource and community in ways where we know that community members, right? Community members from the communities that are experiencing the most harm are the best people to keep that community safe. And so we look at models such as Cure Violence and the Credible Messenger Justice model, which really looks to people who have experienced violence themselves, that have experienced mass incarceration and criminalization, and people who have actually committed some of those violence at times, but have shifted their life around to actually be an asset to the community. Look at how they actually are the ones, they're the mayors of the community that help prevent harm from happening in the first place. Their ears are closest to the ground, and they're able to prevent and stop violence before it pops off. And so we look at that interpersonal violence and how we as community can keep ourselves safe. We keep us safe. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. And so we look at that. We actually understand that police actually only come to the scene after a harm has already been done, and oftentimes escalate that harm to another harm. to cause more problems and pain. So we want to see resources actually dumped into communities to create more cure violence programs, to create more credible messenger programs that actually are about transforming our communities and systems, are about rehabilitation, are about restoration, are about healing, and are about creating a better reality for all of our residents. And so that's a little bit about what we do. We do a whole lot more. One of the big things that we're leading now that Ms. Nisi will talk about is our clemency campaign to release women. And before Ms. Nisi starts, I do want to pause and give an opportunity, because I've been talking a whole lot, for any questions that you may have. And I'm sorry, I just, you know, I'm feeling it right now. We're excited to be on this call, and super excited about getting out here in these streets to take down this flag. So.
It's as we transition, let's just see if we can try to get you off and on with the link, because as it's kind of been like, you know, old time around the table listening to the radio, and what I'm finding in this conversation is that the words are landing in me in a way that when I'm watching and listening, they're not coming through. So I just want to notice for myself and appreciate for myself, though I want to see y'all that that there is a certain there is deep power in the work that you are doing and the words flowing out of that work. So I just want to appreciate that, and what you are sharing is the reason why we are gathered. So so I just want to appreciate you again for being here and giving us a little peek into what y'all have been working on for many years. But yeah, so we'll after Ms. Coleman, you share some of what you've been doing in this process, and happy anniversary. We'll kind of just open up the kitchen table, and the folks who are in the chat are going to send in questions, and we're just going to have a conversation, and it'll just be a big kitchen table with all 70 of us or so. So that's kind of how it'll go from here.
Okay.
So yeah, Ms. Coleman, you want to share a little bit about what you're focused on right now?
Oh, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Denise Coleman, and I'm so glad that I am a part of this conversation today. It is with great pleasure, great honor that I sit here and be able to give you everything that I have. Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. I served 38 years inside, and it wasn't easy. It was very hard. So my work started inside. And as my work started, I seen more and more of what needed to be done. So I started writing about it. And as I wrote about it, somebody was working on trying to get me out, and I was so busy writing, trying to get all of the conditions that was going on and that I had experienced inside out to the people out here in the world. And they were trying to get me out. So I'm very grateful to the People's Advocacy Institute with the executive director, Rukia Lumumba, and the work that she does. And only thing I can tell you is that I wanted to be a part of that mission and working and helping to decarcerate as many people as I can, not only here in Mississippi, but all over. Wherever I set my feet, I try to do some work. But here in Mississippi is my place. It's my place because they work hard. We work hard. Tirelessly. I watch every day that we go out, do work, and you think you're going to do one work, and you wind up doing something else. So from ISIS raids all the way up to decarceration, all the way up to all the deaths that they had in Mississippi CMCF and Parchman Penitentiary, all the rallies, all the protesting, all of that. So right now, what I'm working on is trying to help the women get released and writing the governor and sending postcards and letters to the governor to help the elderly, those who have been incarcerated 25 and more years inside. They're sick, they're aging, and they're really no threat to no one. Not at this point. And it's not getting any better, it's getting worse. The conditions is very horrible, they're horrific inside, and there's no place for a human being, seriously. So we do all that we can do. I do all that I can do, not only with just tell that we are helping them, but write letters. It takes a lot. Yes, we can sit down and type letters up and send inside, but I think it is more personal when you handwrite a letter to those that's inside, because I was inside and I love to get mail. And you can bet every resident that's inside is want mail. We need the support. I think of days, every day I think of how can we help them and supporting them, giving them hope, trying to change their condition, asking them, do they have everything that they need inside to stay safe as far as this COVID has taken over, and it's taken over inside as well. So we trying to keep them with sanitizer and different stuff that they need, especially for women. That's personal. And any ladies that's on this call know what I'm talking about. It's very hard, but we keep on pushing, we keep on trying, and we're not going to stop. We're going to keep on going till something happens, and we're going to keep on going till something changes. And I ask you to stand and support with us, because we're doing the work, and it's no letting up. Thank you for listening to me. Now, the rest of what I have to say is Violence Interrupters and Cure Violence. That team is a working team too. Going out into the communities and trying to see what's the need of the people, what the people want. They're the ones that make the decision and telling us what they want to see change, and seeing if we could meet them and strategize in any way that's possible to make policies, to talk to law changers, the legislation, whoever we have to talk to, we do it. The work on the ground, the boots is on the ground, and we are doing the work, and we let the high definition people do the talking. So I appreciate you, and we're gonna keep on doing the little people work, doing the big people work still.
Thank y'all. Yeah. So thank you all. Yeah. And sorry that you guys can't see us. Yeah.
Wow.
Powerful voices and powerful work. It carries, and we feel you. We feel you deeply. And so I just want to invite the folks who are listening in. If you've got questions for Rakia and Ms. Coleman, please put them in the chat, because I'm about to pass it to Anasa to help kind of open up the conversation. And we're just gonna sort of see where we need to go. And one of the, as we sort of transition, I think Christina, you work with a lot of folks who've been doing this work, and in a lot of different communities across the country who are building these alternatives. And if there's any of those voices that we need to bring to the table, I just want to make sure you bring them in as well. So I want to encourage that. So definitely put questions into the chat, and I'm going to turn it over to Nasa to see what we can cook up here at this table.
I'm so happy to hear from Rakia and from Miss Nisi, because Jackson is actually one of my favorite places, and I have so many questions, because I know a little bit about your story, Rakia, and your family story. I've been to Jackson many times, met you a couple times, and I just am so curious about the shift from what people know as Mississippi to the Mississippi that you, your community are creating, because I think at it, fundamentally, the conversation that we're having. So let's open up the conversation. We're going to bring everybody back in. Harold, who you all know from the first time we met, of course, Rakia and Ms. Coleman, Maya and Rawa, who you've met before, Taj and myself, and then Christina, who Taj was just talking to a little bit earlier. So just to be clear, I am creating a space. I'm setting a table. It's some cute glasses on the table, a really nice tablecloth, but this is not my conversation. It's our conversation. So please feel free to ask each other questions. And we have a couple of questions that we'd like to ask too, but we are here together. And then folks who are watching, you can put questions in the Q&A box on your screen or in the chat, and we will bring those in as they come in real time. So please feel free to participate also. And yeah, so let's go.
So it looks like we got a question from our colleague Red Dawn Foster from Return to the Heart Foundation and state legislator in her community. Are you there, Red Dawn? Do you have a question you wanted to just share with the table? Let's see.
Hi, Taj. She said she didn't actually have a question. Her hand is
Okay.
Well, I can definitely just jump in. And I thought that was you, and so great. We can't see anybody either. It's just black screens up on our thing as well. But I didn't want to assume, but it's great to be on the call with you. I think the last time we were here, we were able to break bread with you at the amazing Makani Timber's house.
Right, the three of us, yes.
Yes. So just really am grateful to be on here with you. You know, one of the things that I think people often, when they think about Mississippi, they think about the movie Mississippi Burning. And they think that we're still living in a space and a time where we are under this pretty aggressive and violent atmosphere of constantly having to defeat white supremacy as soon as we walk out the door, right? It's an idea that we are living barefoot, you know, dirt roads and all of that. When in reality, what we see here in Mississippi is great potential and opportunity.
Yes.
Mississippi has one of the largest Black populations in the nation. It is home to the largest elected, has the most Black elected officials in the nation. It has 19 counties. It has one of the largest county bases of Black people. 19 counties, predominantly Black counties, with nearly close to 30 counties, almost predominantly Black. And that's important for a number of reasons. It's important because this myth that we're living, that there is no opportunity for us to move forward is not true. We have seen the ability to actually control some of where we exist. And that's important because it gives us hope and it helps us to experiment with governing. And we haven't always done it right? And so right now, talking about investing in communities. In the past, I think what we did in the past is that we put a lot of effort and resources into electing people, but we didn't begin to do that second part, which was reinvesting in our very communities in a non-capitalistic way. And so as a result, what we saw consistently over and over again is we saw our communities remain struggling while we have these Black towns where resources were consistently and are consistently being taken from them because people who have still the majority of the wealth of that community to maintain ownership of the land, have decided not to live in that community once it becomes a Black government. And I'm sharing this with you because it's really important to understand what that wealth extraction does. It creates a poor tax base, and so people who come into the city to work, right, but live outside of the city are not required to pay taxes in the city that help build the tax base so that students in the city can have a good public education and have resources to have that. So that the water and sewage department can actually operate and have the machinery that it needs to actually fix the serious sewage issues and infrastructure issues that exist in cities so that residents aren't living in sewage, right? What it does is it extracts the resources and revenue that the city has to be able to just care for the basic needs of its residents. And it allows for residents instead to continue to live in spaces where they have to fight for capital to be able to live a better life. What we're trying to do in Jackson and really trying to do in other parts of the state of Mississippi eventually, especially in the area of the Delta, is to kind of look at what does it mean to have a dignity economy? What does it mean to actually engage in more solidarity economy, where we see a collective sharing of resources and the ability to create more cooperatives, where we're able to care for the basic needs of each other and not rely on capital as our mainstream of revenue to exchange. And so looking at how do we create housing cooperatives that are allow for residents to actually live and produce on the land that they're on, the food that they need in exchange in that way. How do we begin to produce in even small ways the materials that our students need inside of schools? If a student needs a chair, how do we begin to use fabrication labs and other new technology to build those small things through small time production so that our students are now not only learning a trade, but they're also producing the things that they need inside of the school, because the state has consistently defunded our public school system here in Mississippi and has never actually funded it to the level that it needs to be. So how do we begin to, one, yes, of course, continue to push the state to give us what we need, but also how do we become self-sustaining? How do we begin to take ourselves, become self-determined and take control into our hands? And so that's some of the work that we're doing here through the People's Assembly. That's the work that when we're in community talking about violence interruption, that's the first thing that residents say. That's the first thing that folks want. They want housing. They want to create it themselves. They're not asking for a handout. They're not asking for people to come and just drop, some housing to us. They're talking about, give me that land over there. I'll build a house on the land, right? And so that's what we want. We want to resource our residents and our community members with the tools and the resources to get the land, to build up what we need, and to begin to be self-sustaining ourselves. We know that we have a right to resources for our cities. We know that. And we're going to demand the state to do that. But we also want the opportunity to build and contribute in our cities ourselves the way we believe we need to do that, to keep ourselves safe and to have long-lasting, sustainable income and wealth for our community. I hope that makes some sense.
Yes, that made more sense than lots of what I've heard over the past. There's a couple of things that you said, Rakia, that really, really are sticking out to me. I heard you say something I've never heard before. You use the language of dignity economy, and I love that so much. And I wanna just selfishly make a note that the thing that you highlighted about Jackson, about Mississippi, is the thing that's true across the South. Is oftentimes there are high concentrations of Black communities where the people resource is there, and the kind of the natural resource of creativity and people and movement is there, but the financial resource is not there. And I want to go to you, Rawa, and talk about just go up the map a little bit to the north, this about as north as you can get here in Buffalo. And I want to pull out some of what Rakia said for you, because one of the brilliant things, as a woman who may or may not be on the call with us, named Amaka Agbo, who is just brilliantly gorgeous, and her talk about restorative economy. And one of the things that she talks about is disaggregating capital from capitalism and disaggregating government from governance, and just going on this theme that Rakia is talking to us about community governance. And I want to hear from you about kind of the work that you're doing and how that applies with you. And in this moment of, defund police, and really, really that's a conversation about public safety. Can you connect for us what the conversations that you all are having in your community as you think about governance and community engagement in this particular moment in history? What does that look like to you in the work that you're doing in Buffalo?
Well, thank you so much for that, Inasa. And I just wanted to say, Ms. Rakia, we haven't met, but I know a lot of folks from Mississippi, and Ms. Denise, thank you so much for your presentation. And one thing I wanted to say is that I don't know who thinks that about Mississippi and Jackson in particular, because they're fools. Many of us here in the movement world are huge fans and really pay attention in particular to your electoral work, and the political astuteness of what comes out of Jackson is really just, next level. And also big fans of your cooperative solidarity economy, idea of the means of production, and also self-determination, and how all of those things are very much interconnected. And I think similarly in our work, we feel very much this idea of building new economies. So we have Cooperation Buffalo is actually a project of Push Buffalo. We believe in community control of resources and community ownership of land and our clean energy futures. But I think the thing that is the most interesting, and I feel like does this so well, is that you said that the people that are closest to the problem, that have their ears to the ground, actually have the best solutions. And our success is really comes from harnessing that social capital and knowledge of place and knowledge of land that has gotten us to the community ownership. So Push Buffalo owns about 100 parcels of land in a 25 square block area. We started out with, of course, a basic need such as housing, green, affordable housing, as a way to stabilize a low-income community and the people there. And we know what the outcomes are for education, stability for employment, and all of that. But then we took it a little bit further, which is the people that are of and from our communities are going to be skilled to build their own housing. So we have a workforce program in the trades that is looking at green construction, weatherization, green efficiency, green infrastructure, and also building renewable energy and maintaining it. And so I think we are already moving towards that. And what does that really mean? And then of course, the next phase for us is the part about actual people owning it, which is why we started working with Cooperation Buffalo and our new economy strategies about what if the workers actually now have are able to own their labor. But it also means when we're building renewable energy projects, it's the community that's going to own it. In some ways that we're even looking at it now is, of course, we've had to be part of the not-for-profit industrial complex to get us to where we are, because you've got to draw the money down in order and bring those resources to communities in order to do this work. And even though we're tied under like the guidelines of what it means to operate in that framework, we're really looking forward to all the land that we own, all of the housing that we have built can now turn that into community ownership, right? And so when the mortgages and all of that runs out, how are we taking the next 10, 15, 30 years, our residents ready to be the owners and the stewards of actual housing that we have built? So yeah, I think that's the natural progression. And then of course, when we think about policing and why we're asking for defunding the police and reinvesting in things like education, mental health issues, community policing, all of that. And of course, I believe in abolition. And I think that defunding police is the next right step to get us to, really talking about what we really need to do to center our humanity, which is abolition. So I think that in this moment, why this work is so important as we think about the movement for Black lives, as we talk about reparation, as we talk about repatriation of land to Indigenous people, is that it has been the one thing that has controlled us from the beginning. So when you think about slavery, when you think about the genocide of Indigenous people 500 years ago to now, that has been the one control of how I refer to it as a very, very simple way of thinking of it is slavery, the gift that keeps on giving. So when we think about our economy, when we think about the people, and we have to keep these people completely controlled throughout, whether it's fear, terror, what have you, and also economic depression. And so I think we're in a critical moment now where it is the single issue issue over years, that if we begin to make a shift there, that all the other things around, housing, climate change, and all of that can really be dealt with or gotten to as like it's like very tangible for us right now.
Thank you so much for that. I want to go to you, Harold, because if you listen to the story of Memphis, the story of Buffalo, and you now hear a story of Jackson, one of the things that we all have in common is this idea that land is important for our sovereignty and our liberation. And I know that's a big part of your story too. And I would love to hear you talk about the importance of this angle as land acquisition and regenerative development in this conversation about safety and sovereignty and self-determination in our communities.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And thank you, Mississippi crew from the South. I'm from South Carolina. And first of all, I wanted to tell you, thank you for the great work that you're doing there in Mississippi. It was 5 years ago this month, almost right now, when we took our Confederate flag down here in South Carolina. So I feel you, but I do want to give you a word of caution. Reverend Jesse Jackson and some other ministers who often told us is like we celebrate taking down the Confederate flag, but that Confederate flag agenda still flies high. And we can celebrate taking down the flag, but that Confederate flag agenda that's depriving us from healthcare, education, criminal justice, environmental Jim Crowism, and the economic and social impact is what we better pay attention to take down. That flag can stay there, but if I don't have healthcare and I don't have all these other things, what are we talking about? So yes, ma'am, land, empowerment. And that's one that, when you're talking about the reinvestment in communities, and I, hearing some of the conversations about policy, that's the biggest thing I think we need to pay attention to, and even what's going on right now. And I know I'm driving in and out, but, some of the tangible things that I think we're missing when we talk about that political power and policy is the fact that it seems like in the South, we only have 10% of participation in voter turnout. And so we talk about these things that are impacting, affecting us in the community, which is why one of the things we did was, we elected our vice chair to city council, because when they sit at the table and they prioritize, what's going to go where, the priorities in investment, if you don't have an ally at the table, it's kind of like, we hear people talk about having a seat at the table. If you don't have someone in there, you're going to be on the menu, not at the table. And so this is where I think it's very important to make sure that we get these folks elected. The sheriffs, as I heard the folks from Mississippi talking about, needing to elect these folks to office, because, without that empowerment and being able to, turn the corner for housing, healthcare, those things to create that wealth within your community, and waiting on other people to do it, it's not going to happen. That's been that way since the Emancipation Proclamation and all the way up to today. We're waiting for the cavalry to come across the hill, and it's not coming. So I think when we organize and we begin to prioritize what is the vision within these communities, I think we can see that point to turn the corner, as Rob was stated there in Buffalo, and what you're doing in Memphis and what we've been able to do here in South Carolina. And to, I guess, Anasa, to talk about how to do that. How do you build a holistic approach in these communities? You have to include this whole thing of the criminal justice conversation of what's going on. And that was one of the things that we were able to do when we applied and we got our Weed and Seed grant to address the community policing. We were able to address and assessing a sex crime ring, which our sheriff's department didn't even know existed. We knew what was on the ground. We were able to address it. We got that out. This human trafficking ring of 14-year-olds being shipped from Atlanta in the middle of our community. We removed that, and now what we have is a row of condos that we have in that space that we were able to take out. And so, I mean, this conversation is pretty big, huge, and it's kind of like taking a bite here, but Anasa, can I ask one question to you, since this is a kitchen table conversation?
I would love it, please.
As our folks from Mississippi, I mean, I've been burning to find out the truth, but hearing that we have all the Black elected officials that are in Mississippi at the local level and state level, what's happening with the funding from the casinos? And when you look at the BP oil spill, Gulf Coast settlement, you know, what really happened to those dollars, the billions of dollars that went into the Gulf Coast, and especially Mississippi, where you're located?
Great question. Great question. And one of our warrior women down here, Colette,
Kitchen Battle.
Yes.
Yeah,
Center for
sorry.
Law Policy. Yes.
Is leading a lot of the efforts around environmental justice and the conversation around a new Green New Deal, a new red, black, and green New Deal here. And so we really appreciate that work, because reality is that a lot of those dollars did not come to community members. It did not come to small business owners. A lot of it went to casinos. A lot of it went, and casinos did not reinvest in communities. They reinvested in themselves and in their pockets. And so just, I'm sure you can imagine what really happened, is that community still suffered with little to no ability to rebuild. And so as a result, communities remain poor. When we talk about, you know, the Black elected officials, yes, we have Black elected officials. And I said that, and you know, I shared that earlier because I don't want people to think that we have, that we're not thoughtful in terms of understanding the need for political power. We are, but it can't just be a Black face in a room if that doesn't have an understanding around what is necessary around shifting this idea that we have to have capital and capitalism, right? I think somebody said that earlier. And so, like, how do we really begin to help shift people's minds around understanding a solidarity economy and a dignity economy? And then how do we also really begin to shift the tide of governing? Harold, I really appreciate a lot of what you shared. And I would really just, again, push also this idea around the assemblies as a space where people can begin to actually take direction from community members in an even more impactful way that has significant weight. One of the things my father used to do when he was mayor is he would walk into an assembly and he would share an idea that the city was considering, or he would share a policy, and then he would ask the residents, how should I vote, right? He would take his direction from the residents. And so we really want to begin to offer, you know, that model and around how do we begin to shift to more community-led governance. And I'll tell y'all, we're excited about the opportunity to see the Confederate emblem taken off of the state flag, but it is far from our North Star. It is not our end goal. It is just a step in the right direction to give our people a little bit of more morale, to give us a little bit more hope, to let us feel even just a small victory when there's so much chaos and so much hurt and so much pain. We want to be able to at least have that little bit of joy. So just thank y'all so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that, Rukia. And I think as we talk about, you know, symbols coming down over and over all across the world, we've seen, we know that that's not the end goal, but I also think that it's really important because what we're seeing is a shift in the narrative. Again, like when you see statues and Confederate flags and all those things, what it says is that these people in their lives were more important than the people that they harmed over and over and over again. And to see those things coming down is not by far the final step, but it is an amazing shift in the way that we all think about the value of Black life and who needs to be centered and who needs to be protected. And so I'm excited about that quite a bit. I want to switch the conversation now over to Christina, and I want you to talk to us, Christina, about the work that you're doing and this question about how do we activate capital in support of these really transformative but comprehensive, right, measures. So a lot of folks who are in the funding space, they are it's difficult for them to see big picture, full 360, right, projects like this as viable for funding. And I'm interested in how you wrap your mind around it and how you work with other funders to bring them into these comprehensive conversations around transformation and community.
Thank you, Anasa. I appreciate that prompt. Appreciate you all having me at the table. Appreciate that. And I'm also hoping to get a no because your water bottle is really fire, Anasa. And you said that we all had our little teacups. So I'm really hoping I get one that's as fly as yours. I'll give you my address in the chat box. Thank you.
Got it.
So yeah, I mean, I'll be really honest with you. My focus has always been really on the criminal justice system because in the community that I grew up, which is a very multiracial community, but all very, very low-income community. And in fact, when I went to go visit Rawa for the first time, part of what moved me so much was the inspiration because Rawa's community in Buffalo is my community in Syracuse. We are the mirror communities. 3 hours down the interstate, but we're mirror communities. And so when people ask me about that, the holistic approach, part of what I remind people of, especially on the investment side, is there are so many ways that investors are making money off the system right now. We better use the exact same level of sophistication and coordination to try to undo this. Otherwise, we're not really going to be, right? And so, I believe just to underline what Rakia said, and Harold and Rawa and everyone, I really believe that no matter what issue you care about, that is your primary issue, you're never going to win it unless we absolutely decarcerate America. You care about housing, Rawa does this better than almost anybody else in the nation, and I can toot her horn and her whole team's horn because I know them. I've seen the power of their work, and I've built with her people to know the authenticity and the integrity with which she's doing her work. Is if you don't have a lens around decarceration, if you are not centering formerly incarcerated people, systems impacted communities that are over targeted with police, that are over incarcerated, we're not going to get free. If we want to change the education system, the healthcare system, right, there is such deeply entrenched bias, especially towards folks who have been systems impacted, and that we got to address that as well. And so, when I work with other investors, one of the things that I first start with is what are the different ways that we are making money off of this $285 billion a year industry, right? Already, because there are very sophisticated ways that this system has utilized different financial instruments. I'm gonna give you an example, and I wanted to ask permission for Rakia if I could give even the example just to talk about Mississippi right now, because it's a great example. Is that okay, Rakia?
Of course, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So in our support to try and be supportive to all the folks down in Mississippi who are doing some of the most sophisticated and important work in the nation, there are so many different financial levers. Ms. Denise, she talked about the abhorrent facilities inside and that's happening there. Those are publicly traded companies that are providing that healthcare in Mississippi DOC. And most likely, if you're an investor on this call or have any friends that are investors, you're invested in it because they're not screened out of people's investments like private prisons. Maybe people do know about private prisons, but they don't know that Centene is the parent company of Centurion. Centurion provides all the healthcare in Mississippi DOC, and they absolutely have never even received a shareholder activism letter that has pushed them to of the on-the-ground changes that Ms. Denise and Kia and her whole team have been asking for. So there are ways that part of us is that we have to leverage our relationships and leverage our power to make sure that we are aligning and the wind in the sails of the leaders who are the most directly impacted. Because they can tell you the companies that they're creating merchandise for, right, inside with prison labor. They can tell you the companies that are making money off of the food, communications, healthcare systems, etc. And I guarantee you they are in your index fund if you're an investor. And so the opportunity with that is that you can actually activate those networks to then bring the voices of Ms. Denise and others into that shareholder meeting, right? And that's not something that maybe individually we could do, but collectively we certainly can. And so if we're really about self-determination, it means bringing and opening those doors and making sure that their voices are in the places that they don't expect at all, right? The other aspect that I wanted to outline is the slippery nature of capital in specifically the criminal justice space. So, one of the things that happened was Rakia and Ms. Denise and her whole team, they had a relative victory where they were able to close a unit down there in Parchman because of the absolute abhorrent conditions. But you know what the governor was going to do? He was going to contract with a private prison company to move those folks. So we have to be locked arms with our relatives on the ground who are directly impacted, because we have to make sure that it's not just an okey doke 1-2 step there, but that in fact we are taking it all the way across the finish line to support their campaign asks. And then to the point that we were talking about before around how that then, once we know how we've been invested in things, this is across our asset classes. So if you've ever been invested in a municipal bond, I can absolutely guarantee you that yielding and probably are still profiting at plus tax advantages for the building of every prison in America. If you are invested in private equity, if you're invested in, for example, police brutality, where there is literally $838 million that were bonded out that we all made a lot of profit on. And earlier today, you heard Rakia and Ms. Denise talk about the violence interrupters, the cure violence model, the credible messengers. And earlier today, I was on the phone with one of those credible messengers around in Chicago, for example. And he said, Christina, I'm very excited because we have created a new office in the mayor's office that is around violence prevention. And they've put $11 million in it. And I said, Mervin, in Chicago, in the last 10 years, there has been $1 billion worth of interest paid to investors off of just your police brutality settlements alone. So we got to get 3 more zeros next to that number for that to be in any way an okay situation. I want you to get $11 million, but I also want us to come to the scale of this issue. And that takes investors being hand in hand with community to make sure that every single way that there is profit being made off this system on the backs of other people, that we are plugging that hole and moving this like a tidal wave into our communities, and investing to make sure that we're helping their capacity grow. We want to support leaders to be able to get scaled capital, right? We want to be able to make sure that those communities, for example, in Mississippi, one of the most shocking statistics I ever heard was when Rakia told me that there are more than 1,000 people inside the Mississippi DOC who have been approved for release, but because they don't have a place that is recognized by probation and parole as a safe place for them to be released to, an address for them to be released to, they keep them incarcerated. And so as investors, our role is to not just make sure that we are plugging the holes and stopping the financing of mass incarceration, but also at the same time, we have to be investing in those infrastructure projects with the community to make sure that the community has the capital to be able to grow their housing to meet the needs, not just that have happened, but are continuing to happen inside the prison industrial complex, of which both policing and mass incarceration are huge profit models. And that also includes everything that Ms. Denise talked about in terms of the sewage issues in the community, the lead in the water, right? All of these things are things as investors we absolutely can and must be investing in to address those racial disparities and make sure that systems impacted communities, Black and Brown communities, are actually invested in. And we have to do so in a way that creates the criteria that we will evaluate this investment by how much you actually decrease racial disparities. We will evaluate this investment by how much you are actually serving and investing in Black and Brown communities. And if we do anything less than that, they'll figure out a way to not get it there. So we have to actually put it in our terms and evaluate and hold people accountable to that, even divest our money after we've invested if they're not willing to do it. So that's the way that when we're talking to other investors in NASA, that we make sure that we're bringing them along to understand how they're deeply invested, how they can divest but also leverage their money, and then how they can align those asset classes also with infrastructure investments in systems impacted communities, as well as political contributions to make sure that those elected officials that Harold and Rakia and others were speaking about know that there's investors that are actually on the side of justice and want to see this happen as well.
Well, thank you so much, Christina. One more question before we hand it back over to Kat to close. But I think that there's really two questions I want to ask. We're going to see how this plays out. So I want to go back to Rawa for a minute, because one of the things that I loved about your story, and the same with Harold, because where we are in Memphis, like, we're just starting and we're just getting our, we're just getting a hunger for what this could be. And the thing that I love about both of your stories, you had to start and you kept going, and it just keeps going and going and going. And the truth is, the way that we're seeing this narrative shift go to scale at this point, we need to have the same kind of scale on the ground, both with the investment and the results of those investments, both on the community side and the investor side. And I would love to just briefly hear from the two of you about what it really took for you to be able to go from like your initial vision of this insular thing to go to actually building a community where the end of the story still hasn't come yet, and it may never come. Can you talk to us a little bit about what it took to be able to bridge that transition?
It's interesting. That's a really big, beautiful question. I love it, by the way. Is that it's really the power of the people. We have several departments. So I think of my organization as being 5 or 6 organizations in one, really to show the interconnection. And we didn't start out that way. We just really started out, number one, as organizers. We did door knocking. We asked the people what they wanted to do. And it was really from that plan that the community had a vision for the neighborhood. And so then we had what I refer to it as we iterate and evolve. We have annual community congresses. It started out initially by let's hand, right? Because if we own it, then we can plan for it and no one can take it away from you. The two big primary needs of this community 15 years ago was that we needed good, livable housing. Our housing conditions are just, we have the second oldest housing stock in the country. So you can imagine we have a bigger lead problem in our housing stock than Flint does in its water, trust me. And so those were the big issues, the affordability. Of course, being in a cold weather region, you have housing stock that's more than 100 years old, more than 75% of our housing stock. And it was built before insulation. The other thing about Buffalo, we're the 3rd poorest city in America, we still are, is that people work. They're the working poor. And so oftentimes, there's even a stigma of like, you're so lazy for being poor. No, people are working all kinds of jobs, but not earning enough. So there wasn't a living wage, a family sustaining wage. And so they wanted good paying jobs. Those are the two things that we started with and said to ourselves, okay, how do we plan that? How do we bring the resources here so we can begin to do that? And so that's kind of what catalyzed push in our work. And over time, what we've done is we take one success, and there's always an evaluation period because your community is going to keep you honest and tell you if you're doing it right or not. But if you don't have the inside outside game that you play, right? Because what we've always said about Push is this: we know what we want where we live, but also we have the solutions. We have this is a problem. We are telling you what you need to do based on our environment, our land, and the opportunities and the resources that exist here, right? And so we have continued to organize. And then, of course, there's that tension because we're also developers. We are also workforce development. We do, build renewable energy. We pass really big policy legislation laws. And so there's a way once you begin to build that power that you can begin to iterate and evolve. And our thinking also continues to iterate and evolve. For example, we decided that the whole way that we got into climate justice, and I'll keep this brief, is really to address the energy burdens on our community. We pay between 25 to 40% of what people were earning instead of the 6%, which is the national average. So we decided that we were also going to build a net zero house and we were going to renovate it, which is unheard of. And we had 43 people from the community figure out how to build geothermal systems and all of these kinds of things, right? And that was in 2010. Well, guess what? The technology, it's 2020 now, 2019. We went back and actually made some serious changes to that. And again, used it as a workforce training opportunity so that people can learn the new technology like air source, ground source pump, heat pumps, and all of these kinds of things. And so I think that's the thing that we should not be afraid of anybody that's doing this. Do the best that you can. There will always be time to come back and fix it. But the thing about when being in practice of like the new economy strategies, the just transition framework and all of that is it's a practice. And sometimes maybe you don't have all the experts in the room, but you do the thing and then you have moments where you say, you know what, that worked really, really well. So we're going to continue to do more of that. This didn't work out so much. We either throw it away or we iterate and evolve on that. And so I think that's the thing about even investors as they're thinking about us, because y'all don't have a level of trust that we don't know what we're doing. We do. It doesn't look like the way the systems currently exist, and you need to trust that we know what we're doing, but also allow room for experimentation, for mistakes to happen, because when we make the mistakes, that's when we learn the most, and then we can get to that scale very quickly. For example, I said in 2010, we built a net zero house. We're about to build a 53 units of housing, 17 scatter sites in our community that are being built to net zero, passive house with supportive housing, all affordable, being built by our residents right here in the community. So that's the kind of scale that you can go to in a matter of 5 to 6 years.
That was the perfect answer. Thank you so much. That was a perfect way to end. I just want to say that again, is that this work is a practice. And we are all doing our best every day to lean in, to get focused, to be able to listen to each other, to be in community, and to practice what it means to continue to evolve our way of being in community, our way of dismantling power and building power all at the same time. Thank you so much to everybody on the panel. We're going to turn it back over to Kat so we can close, and we will see you all on the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nasa. Before we go to Kat, I just want to gratitude to all, and just, you may have come to this conversation thinking we're here to talk about defunding the police, and we did. And what is so powerful is this notion that when communities essentially have stewardship of the land, stewardship of the place that they're in, from that, all things are possible. All things are possible. And, Malcolm taught us, and so many people taught us, and Ms. Hamer taught us, and now's the time. And I think there's so many tools shared in this conversation. Just gratitude to all of you. So wanted to share that. So Kat,
yeah,
turning it to you.
Daunting. This will be really daunting, but I was impressed with the same thing, that when we talk about power, the power is actually already situated in community. And so there are those of us who have to give power up. There are those of us who have to work on taking power back, but power is also built from the self-reliance and visioning of the community itself. So I was just madly taking notes, but some of my favorite parts: community-led governance means going from being governed to governing. People's assemblies are back, and they need to be, because this is a time of great iteration and evolution. Even those who have been denied, especially those who have been denied the right to vote, have to be at the core of this. When you change systems for Black folks, it changes them for everyone. We have to fund community residents to protect themselves from state harm. It's minimum is to elect law enforcement leadership and other representatives who are Black and brown, but we also need them not to just be a face in the room. They need to listen to those who have experienced the worst of the criminal justice system and have the best insights to avoid harm and lead community safety. The clemency campaign, I hope we find a way to really support that. The work being done there, conditions in the prisons are horrific. We know that, but in the time of COVID, here we go. It's just doubling down on that. Resources are in fact extracted by remote ownership once a community is Black governed. That one is sticking with me, and connecting to all of the comments about the sophisticated ways in which money is made off of incarceration and other community ills. And it's insidious. It's in everyone's portfolio, unless, like Kristen Holetnia, you're very assiduous about driving it out. We have to look at all the asset classes. We have to look at private equity, hedge funds, index funds, municipal bonds, bank accounts, everything. Or else we're going to not realize how we are implicated and supporting these things. And we have to get out of that and get into proactive investing in communities. We need to push the state for what we need, but we also need to become self-sustaining dignity economies, liberating people from living in degraded conditions and fighting for capital, and instead seizing the means of production, building a new economy that's based on more cooperative models. People closest to these problems have the best solutions. They have that social capital. People from the communities will be the ones skilled in building what the community needs. Community ownership is key. Defunding the police is just one of the ways we'll free up resources for that community ownership and pave the way for abolition, repatriation of land to indigenous peoples, and giving control back to communities over their land, over their labor. If we make the critical shift on who controls what and who, other issues get resolved as well. We need to take down the Confederate flag agenda as well as the Confederate flag. Have to get folks elected, but then they need to listen to their constituents and get their agenda done. There are very sophisticated ways in which we're making money off of systems of harm. So decarceration has to be at the heart of every crusade. And money cannot be more important than people, but we have to follow the money because it's still causing a lot of the outcomes. So next time we're going to get to talk about much more about the various ways that investment can be good and the ways that it can be bad, including taking a very hard, honest look at philanthropy, whether it's paving the way or in the way. And I'm really looking forward to Taj bringing a lot of the insights from Full Spectrum Capital to that conversation, and others, just as today's panelists enlivened and informed this conversation so brilliantly today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Woo. And I know we're a little bit over. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. On the screen, you can see the link to the resource page, which is where we'll take the resources from the chat that folks shared. Both the folks at the kitchen table and folks in the chat, you'll find that there. You'll find a link to the recording and previous recordings. And Rukia, sort of, your video came back, so I wanted to give you all a chance to just wave and say hello. And it's good to see your faces to go along with the voices. So much love and gratitude. Yes, yes, yes. Any last thoughts from around the table as we close?
Yes, free the land.
Free the land.
All right.
Free the land.
Thank you all so much. Thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good to see you, Nasa. Bye.
Good to see you.
See you later. Thanks.